The Sun by Lois Lowry, Book 2, Chapter 8. Haltingly, pausing to weep, Claire told her remembered story to Alice. Astonished, the old woman asked to examine her scar. Her gnarled hands touched the raised pink flesh and followed the map of it with one finger. She said, this is what I saw the day you came, and I knew you'd have a terrible wound, but never did I see until now that it's decided to remove a child. Imagine, to cut a woman like that. Or a girl. You was just a girl. The pain would have been so fierce it would have killed you. No, Claire explained. I felt nothing when they cut. Before, there was pain, like what Bryn had, with the squeezing of the baby, but when they cut, I felt only pressure, and pushing of the knife, no pain. Alice shook her head as if in disbelief. How could that be, then? There were special medicines, drugs. They took away pain. White willow brings relief, Alice murmured, but not for cutting. We have no herbs for that. I felt nothing. And what of the blood? Alice again touched the scar. Her finger, its knuckle bent and thickened by age, ran the length of the wound. I've seen wounds like this. A fisherman caught and ripped apart by the gaff. A hunter clawed and torn up open by an animal. I have been called to tend them, but I can do naught but to soothe and comfort. The blood pulses away and they die from it, from the blood and the pain. They scream from the pain and then weaken as the blood flows. Their eyes die first. The old woman's own eyes seemed to look into the distance, thinking of the terrible things she had seen and could not heal. Claire looked down herself, at the scar. I couldn't see, but my eyes were covered. She shuddered a bit, as the memory of the mask came to her. But I felt them cut, and you're right. Of course there must have been blood. They had tools, I think, to deal with that. I remember a small sound, she thought, and then tried to reproduce it. Zzz. And I smelled a burning smell, I think. Alice, puzzled, waited for her to continue. Claire sighed. They had something that we don't have here. Electricity. It's hard to explain. I think they had an electric tool that burned and sealed the blood vessels. Zzz, zzz. Alice nodded as if it made sense to her. I burn a wound sometimes, or a snake bite. I use a fire stick to kill the poison. Not for bleeding, though. Not for a huge wound like this one. Claire drew her clothing across the scar, covering it, and the two of them sat together in silence, one with her new and troubling memories, the other puzzling over what had happened to the girl, and why. I must find him, Claire whispered finally. You must? How? Alice stayed silent. She told Bryn. Oh, 1 second. Watching the woman hold and tend her infant one afternoon, Claire confided in her and described the return of the memories. Bryn listened with shock and sorrow. She clutched her own baby tighter as Claire answered her horrified questions. Neither of them was aware that just outside the cottage, beside the door that had been left partly open for fresh autumn air, the little girls, wide-eyed, were listening. They scampered away to tell others, a terrible secret, Beth Ann called it, enjoying the attention she received as she retold the embellished story. Water Claire had a baby. Yes, young as she was. No husband at all. And he took the baby from her. Just stole it away, and she never saw it again since. The secret was murmured throughout the community. Older women lowered their eyes in sympathy. Many of them had lost children in cruel ways, and they knew what strong, lasting grief came with such a loss. Younger ones, jealous of the pretty stranger, tossed their heads in judgment. No husband, wanton thing. We suspected something like that. So she was tossed out of where she lived. Glennis, who had welcomed Claire's attentions at the hand-fasting ceremony in early summer, now smoothed her skirt smugly over her newly rounded belly. I'll have Alice come to midwife me when my time comes, she said with a toss of her head, but I don't want her. Tall Andrus, his face set in hard lines, turned away when he saw her. Something wrong? Claire asked him, puzzled by his cold look. He had always been so friendly. Is it true what they say? Who? And what is it they're saying? Everyone. That you had a child, and no husband. Claire stared at him. The knowledge was still new to her, but it seemed secret. She had yet to think it all through. It was still fragments, some of it. Though from describing it to Alice, she remembered the birth now, clearly and with horror. But child? She had no sense yet of a child. Only something small and newly birthed. It was different where I lived. There weren't weddings, and yes, I gave birth. She found herself speaking tersely to him. She was angered. You can't understand. I was selected to give birth. It was an honor. I was called birth mother. He raised his chin and looked at her with a kind of contempt. You live here now, and you're stained. Stained? What are you talking about? Women who couple in the field, like animals. They have a stain to them. No one wants them after. Oh. Now she understood the concept of what he meant. She had watched the sheep mating. Einar had to explain it to her, how it created the lambs. He had laughed, finding it strange that she knew nothing of the process. That has nothing to do with me, she told Andrews defiantly. Or with me, he said coldly, turned his back and resumed his stacking of wood. Claire watched for a moment, then continued striding on, but her morning was tainted by the encounter. Later, troubled, she told Alice of it while they were having lunch. It's the way here, Alice explained. Foolish, mayhap, but it has always been so. Girls must come to the hand-fasting untouched, or pretend to be. Otherwise no one wants them. Alice shrugged and chuckled. People learn to overlook. Sounds to me as if Andrews was hopeful to have you. He'll overlook with time if you don't remind him. Humph. Claire stood. She fed a piece of spinach to Yellowwing, who hopped happily back and forth on his perch. Then she scraped the leavings from the plate into the bucket. I don't care about Andrews, and I never wished to wed. You didn't, she pointed out. Alice grinned. I was a wilful girl, she said. Wilful? Some said wild. Now Alice laughed loud and wanton. Claire found that the laughter was making her own anger subside. Looking at Alice, wrinkled and bent, it was hard to imagine her as a wilful wild girl. But in the unrestrained laughter, Claire could hear a hint of the carefree creature she must once have been. The children, curious about what seemed a mystery for people who spoke of it in whispers, but too young to judge her, were open with their questions to Claire. They were on the beach, gathering driftwood to dry for the fireplace. The wind was sharp and snapped at Claire's skirt. Did it grow in your belly, like my mum's? Beth Ann asked. Claire nodded, resigned to her knowing. She added a bent stick to the pile. Were it a boy? Delwith's eye were wide. Claire nodded again. Yes, she said, a male. She startled herself. Why had she called it that? Everyone knew a baby was either a girl, like Beth Ann's new sister, or a wee boy. Why had she said the odd word, male, as if she had given birth to a creature of woods or fields? Where did it go, then, your male? Solemn little Ira looked worried. Who took it? Claire smiled to reassure the child. Someone else needed it, she explained, just as your mum needs these pieces of wood. Let's drag that big one over here and see if we're strong enough to break it, shall we? I'm strong. Look at me, how strong I am. As strong as a boy, as a male. The children strutted and shouted as they ran about in the wet sand. Claire glanced toward the high bank that bordered the beach and saw Enar watching. He balanced a wooden yoke across his wide shoulders, and 2 buckets hung level from either side. He was coming from the springs where he got fresh water. With his shoulders bearing the weight, he was still able to use his walking sticks. Now, seeing her watching, he lifted one hand and waved to her. Claire waved back and smiled. So, she thought, there's one young man who doesn't think me stained, or is it that I'm now ruined as he is? She watched him make his way along the path, his feet dragging, one after the other, beside her, in the sand. The laughing children imitated Enar, dragging their feet and limping dramatically, and then watching the furrowed ruts they made filled with sea water and smoothed over.